Good morning, all, to our, I think, last session of our Disciples in Mission program. Before I get going, I want to thank you for leading your group. The overall feedback that I'm getting is very, very positive, and a lot of it is due to you. So I'm going to go ahead and speak about the Isaiah prophecy. Remember that Isaiah, while he is speaking, the subject of his presentation is Israel, that is to say, the nation of Israel. They are in a miserable situation. They are in Babylon in captivity and are longing to go back home to Jerusalem to reestablish Israel as a nation and as a people. And Isaiah identifies the suffering servant, the subject of this reading, of this powerful reading, as Israel. Israel is the one who is suffering. Israel is the one who is struggling. And he points out to them that because of the sufferings, and through the sufferings, you will achieve the greatness that God has in mind for you. Now, the church has adapted that reading from Isaiah and applied it to Jesus. Some would say Isaiah had Jesus in mind when he said this, this theme of the suffering servant. But really, as we understand it, the early Christians, in looking on Christ and his sufferings, saw in the passage from Isaiah enough so that they could say, yeah, this is Jesus too. And as a matter of fact, we could say it's all of us. If Israel was suffering and Jesus was suffering, then we look at our old human race and we see that we're suffering too. But Isaiah tells us to be faithful, to continue to be the servant that you are called to be, and then through the power of God, who is always with us, we will break out and come to the victory that is God's will for us. So it's a very powerful theme, but don't think that Isaiah had Jesus in mind. The early Christians went through the Old Testament text to see what they could apply to Jesus in his role as the suffering servant. The two key words are important: suffering, suffering, and servant. It's not just we're suffering, but we're a servant who is suffering, and we are serving the kingdom of God by working through our suffering. So it's a very powerful reading, something that brings hope to us, brings encouragement to us, and brings above all faithfulness to God to our hearts. The second reading from Philippians is very, very powerful. It really was a hymn that was sung by the early Christians that St. Paul took and placed into this reading. And the hymn is powerful in the sense that it summarizes the whole work of Jesus Christ, who came into our midst, suffered, but through the suffering, the same kind of a theme as Isaiah, brought salvation to the world. One of the things that's very important is what St. Paul, or the hymn, says about Jesus. Because of his sufferings, he was exalted. Reflect on that now. It's through his sufferings that he achieved freedom. And as the reading says, because of this, God lifted him up and established him as the Lord. Now, this is basic Christianity. What it simply means is that Jesus, our brother and the representative of humanity, Jesus Christ, by his suffering, in a sense, earned or was lifted beyond sin and death, and then exalted as Jesus Christ, the risen one, who is the center of our lives. We are Christians because Jesus Christ has suffered and died And as a result of that is the exalted one, the Lord, L-O-R-D, who now is calling us together into the final phase of the kingdom of God. So St. Paul would have us see through this hymn the connection between the suffering of Jesus and the exaltation of Jesus, or the resurrection of Jesus, but not just the resurrection, the establishment of Jesus as the Lord. Remember that word is in there, which means the creator of the universe, or the one who's bringing us all together. This is critical because St. Paul says, because of this, in other words, it was the death that led to the resurrection. And we want to see the death and resurrection as a unity. When Christ died, he rose. When Christ gave himself, he was then exalted. And it's this death and resurrection that is at the heart of our life. As a matter of fact, I tell people that if the death and resurrection of Jesus did not occur, then we'll close up Prince of Peace and I'll go out and work on my golf game. Because it is the essential, critical part of our faith, and that's why we make Easter the great celebration that it is. It's not about Easter bunnies and so on. It's about the death and resurrection of Christ as the critical moment in human history. So reflect on that, because it really is powerful and basic. Because of this, God raised him up and exalted him, so he becomes the Lord.